Welcome, dear viewers, to our natural medicine format. I have an incredibly great doctor with me today, namely the chief physician of the Swiss Mountain Clinic, Dr. Petra Wiechel. Welcome to our studio.
Yes, I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you for coming back and helping us to see certain things in a more holistic way. And to gain deep knowledge, to come into self-responsibility, that's really a great honor for us again and again. Thank you very much.
Yes, but I'll give the thanks back.
That's nice.
So what would it be if I could give someone the opportunity, or would give it, that this is heard or seen? That's great.
I have chosen a topic today, and I would like to talk about body temperature. I just know from statistical things or from self-tests that in the past the body temperature of humans was always 36.8. But if I measure now, I no longer have these values, but values between 35.8 to 36.2. What happened there? And what does that actually mean for us humans, that the body temperature is so low?
That means much, much more than we all believe. That's a phenomenon I'm also observing, and we always have to assume that our body needs operating temperature. So it's not about whether I feel comfortable or whether I don't feel good. And if someone has very high temperatures as a fever, then we see that as a phenomenon that we give great importance to, but which is a very important process at the moment, which we unfortunately also do not understand medically well. But the low temperature would be below 36.8. So 36.8 to 37 degrees is our operating temperature.
That means our viewers could now do a test at home, put a vibrometer in during the broadcast and just see how much it has.
But it's even better if you just do it for 5 days and then have 4 temperatures. So the first one in the morning, then maybe 2 or 3 hours later, in the morning in bed, then maybe in the course of the afternoon and in the evening when you go to bed again. And measure this temperature increase, or also the regulatory rigidity in which you are. And there are not all people who feel this directly. There are a large number of people who also have very clear symptoms due to the low temperature. But of course you also have to understand why the body needs such a temperature of 36.8 and 37.3 degrees. This is due to the fact that, for example, with a low temperature in the stomach the digestive power cannot be called at all. We have such a bad habit that we like to drink cold things. There used to be no refrigerator. Today everything is sometimes ice cold. Also in the USA, ice cold drinks at the beginning. That means the temperature of the stomach goes down quite a bit. And if I have such a cold drink, let's say 5 degrees or 10 degrees, that means my body has to bring it to 37. And at that moment there is a huge energy need that focuses on regulating the temperature again, because the enzymatic power of the stomach, whether it is the gastric acid, but also the pepsin and the counterregulators against the gastric acid. You always have aggressive and defensive measures that actually integrate this interplay of these valuable regulations in the stomach, also the stability of this pH value. This is dependent on the body temperature. And I grew up, I can't remember that my grandmother never forgot to have a warm, hot soup when she was a child. The thought that we are worried about such enzymatic digestive forces developing in the best way is not so bad at all. And that's why you should always make sure that you drink something beforehand that it is also lukewarm, at least at the latest when you drink it before eating. That is very important. You drink before eating anyway to not dilute the digestive juices so much. But that is, for example, A very big reason that we eat too cold. Raw food is also a great form of nutrition, but it is not given to everyone. It is good in certain phases of illness. It is also good for these warm-bloomed people, for these people who are bursting with energy, who are always hot. They have a very great value for their raw food, because they have the highest enriching, energy-wise, and the lowest burden on our body. But not for those who are already in a deep low temperature at the moment. The temperature is regulated by the hypothalamus in combination with the adrenals and the thyroid. And if people now check this temperature 4 or 5 days, 4 times, then you can see exactly where the thyroid is as a regulator. There can be still good thyroid values. Nowadays, in thyroid diagnostics, I think, you limit it to the thyroid-stimulating hormone, TSH. But then you have to have a lot more values and you have to look at a lot more values about the thyroid. Then you would come to a regulatory disorder where you don't detect the thyroid too little or too much medically at all. But only when the organ really degrades overall. And I have a hypo and a subfunction clinically and also in a laboratory way.
I would like to hear it again in general. Do you have an explanation why the body temperature has dropped so much in many people in recent decades?
Yes. So that's one thing, that we are too heavily burdened with cold. The other thing is that also emotional cold, that also a very strong headache in people, that also life in the context of a high stress burden does something with our circulation. Because in stress we tense up, and in stress the capillary situation becomes a big microcurrent area, which of course also supplies the cells with oxygen and nutrients. This is tensed up and this naturally creates a subfunction on the cellular level, or the cell goes out without oxygen. That means, overall, at an optimal body temperature, a high, good microcirculation must always be guaranteed. Otherwise the temperature cannot be maintained. For example, if the oxygen pressure on the cellular level, which must be about 100 millibars, changes, every tumor cell has less than 50 millibars, but even if I now, through cold, through tension, through a microcirculation disorder, regulate the temperature down and thus have a hypoxia as a result, a massive reactivation is created, for example, of all anaerobia. These are fungi. These are bacteria that do not metabolize oxygen, like Clostridium. These are viruses that react.
Is this a causality? If the temperature drops, the pressure drops too. Then I have less oxygen in the cell, therefore less ATP, less energy.
Of course. That's the other thing. The next thing is that you have to say today that there are a lot of drugs that have an effect on temperature regulation. These are antibiotics, these are blood pressure drugs, these are diuretics, these are psychopharmacists, of whom you know.
But we would need a tablet to get a fever, actually.
Yes, that's probably the case. We might also talk about that later, about the fever, how do we encounter fever, what causes fever. But staying in this low temperature means that a large part of the body cannot unfold. So there is a very large regulation order in the body. That means, for example, our enzymes that we form. And we have thousands of enzymes in our blood. Enzymes are biocatalysts. We produce enzymes so that the reaction goes from A to B. That's hundreds of thousands per second per cell. That means we're talking about these values. And if these enzymatic forces, these biocatalysts, are temperature dependent, you have to know as a result that they don't unfold either. That means, if I have a low temperature, for example, we have the highest temperature in our head. And the body cools down. That means, in the head, these 37.3 degrees Celsius are very important. And the body invests less in the abdomen, also thorax. But it has to be within this temperature interval, 36.8 degrees Celsius to 37.3 degrees Celsius. But the process of my digestive power due to my lack of enzymatic provision depends on the temperature. And that's very interesting. Just like the unfolding of the pancreatic enzymes in the small intestine depends on the pH value of the small intestine. But whether this can be kept in balance is also important. And I don't know how well it is permeated.
I understand. I think Birgit Benier was here once. Or Rudiger Dolker. They told me that if the body temperature rises by 1 degree Celsius, the immune system's defense power increases. It doubles. So from 37 degrees Celsius to 38 degrees Celsius, a doubling. From 39 degrees Celsius to 39 degrees Celsius, another doubling. So if I have 37 degrees Celsius to 36 degrees Celsius, I only have 50% defense power.
Not only defense power, but also enzyme performance.
That's dramatic. Everyone who has measured their temperature and is below 36. 8 degrees Celsius would have reduced defense power.
Exactly.
How do I get it back up?
How do I get it back up? A sportsman would never think from the cold that he would achieve something. A sportsman has to warm up when he wins a competition or goes to the gym. So we humans don't have the conditions and the athletic ability that is not given for everyone. Humans love to sit, to walk the most comfortable path, to love the elevator. So the body doesn't get to the point where it produces heat, because it has to, because the blood circulation is tackled and because it becomes more vulnerable. That's a big issue. So through sport, through tension, through physical activity, we can significantly improve microcirculation. Especially in the hormone imbalance, I find it very interesting when people now switch to a training program that slowly brings them back to balance due to their hormonal imbalance. The body is much smarter than we are. It doesn't invest in anything that it assumes is not needed. And in that moment it withdraws and concentrates the priorities on other levels. That's why we have to keep giving it the signal that we need it. And also in this muscular preparation, also energetically, we have a lot of mitochondria in our muscles. We can create energy reserves there. We have to challenge it again and of course bring up the temperature. The other thing is, we haven't finished yet with the why. It's the environmental toxins. Lead makes you stiff. Cadmium, mercury, these are all highly toxic toxins that block the kidneys. These are the environmental toxins that we all take with us through our diet. The body has no plan with that. And they block in such centers. The thyroid is also a very comfortable place to absorb toxins.
So we have it again, detoxify and detoxify.
And of course, it also lives in a situation where the speed of regulation or a regulation stiffness can occur. And that's why you can't emphasize the word detoxification often enough that it always has to go ahead in a process.
I would like to link the conversation to the fiber. We know 36.8 is okay. And if it really increases, because the body has to mobilize its defense forces. It's actually a general war mobilization that the body does to be able to fight a virus. and most of the time, the medicine works with fiber-reducing measures. But I don't quite understand why the fiber should go down if the body is about to wage war.
I think it's more of a problem that the body has developed so socially. We have developed ourselves in all things that work against it. We do that well. And we do that great. But it can also go so far that we ourselves bring ourselves into a regulation blockade. And we have, for example, in the sense of paracetamol, a remedy that then very quickly lowers the fever again. But the body doesn't do anything out of nonsense. It needs this fever to activate so-called pyrogens. These are substances that activate fever that regulate the body's temperature because, for example, bacterial viruses no longer can stand above 38 degrees 5'9" at all. This is how such a massive stimulation of defense is attacked, that a child who can survive this fever very quickly with this infection is through in 1 to 2 days. The child has absolutely cleaned up. The body is able to do that and plays outside again on the 3rd day. But we hardly give this chance to the body. And today, for example, we have the probability that we, a typical population in the USA, it was very clearly noticeable that autism, out of 50 children there is already one that reacts with an autistic disease. This is a really rising trend. But it was typical in the 1980s that paracetamol was now also very easily accessible, no longer recipe-like in Cuba. And autism has increased dramatically because people give their children paracetamol very quickly after the MMR vaccine. And paracetamol is something that has to be metabolized by the liver. If paracetamol is not metabolized well, is detoxified, then an even more highly toxic metabolite is created. That means the liver itself is now in a latent weakness, and this highly toxic metabolite is fed back into the circulatory system and has a high neurotoxic effect. It has a high effect on the under-temperature development overall. And it has a highly toxic effect on the liver itself and on the kidneys. That means I would not do this to a child, not do it, let alone I would welcome to talk about it in an episode. What do you do when children have a fever? Or how do you deal with a fever even with an adult? This is already a topic that you can and should really talk about. Let's come back to the question of what you do or how important the fever is. We simply take the body's normal regulatory power and also the ability to build antibodies. Because it only creates the fever when it is able to deal with this fever, because it acts with reason. The body never does something without a reason. And our patients who are prone to neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's or MS, autoimmune diseases, tumor patients, that is already frightening to answer the question, how often have you had a fever in the last 10 years? No, actually nothing. And you just have to keep in mind that you ensure that you can change a lot through a good detoxification of this fever regulation. That you can go into a training process to produce fever again.
Is this also the case with hypothermia? I mean, I know that you do this in your clinic.
Yes, we do the whole body hypothermia.
That means the body is raised in temperature up to 40, 41, 42 degrees.
We don't go up to 41 degrees, but up to 40 degrees we're fine.
That means the immune system is somewhere at 8 times or even 16 times higher.
Exactly. And within that it's not just that we give the body the chance to clear up massively. Because what don't we know? What it underlyingly constantly transfers to immune performance. But actually it doesn't get done with it underlyingly because it may also be overwhelmed. Because the overload of an infection requires too much immune competence every day. And to really remove that in a fever reaction, to clear it up, of course creates a lot of free space elsewhere. The body doesn't just care about viruses and bacteria. It's also the fungi that arise as a result of a high level of toxic stress. That's a symbiosis that the body has with the body. Those are the parasites that it has. Those are the tumor cells that it has. And within a whole body hypothermia, and I often say that we have no goal. We look at how well they can tolerate the rise of the fever. And there are people where at 38.7 the limit is reached. Because the body is in a pretty. Yeah. It's a lot of work for the body. But after the second one, it's already going faster. And then I get a call back, man, I had a real infection for 3 days. It's unbelievable what's going on there. Especially the mucus that's being worked out today, or an infection. But those are all valuable things that we call sick today. But actually, it's just the body's answer to react to something adequate.
So it would be very healthy if we had a real fever periodically, so that the body can really go through it again. So that it can absorb these parasites, viruses, and everything. So that it has a regulatory ability. And that's getting lost more and more today.
Yes, and of course, that's still supported when I, for example, do a sauna. A sauna is not that intense, but it's an incredible relief for the connective tissue.
Like an infrared sauna.
That's what I mean. An infrared sauna, or a wet sauna, or a Finnish sauna, depending on how burdened I am as a person. Also ascending baths, so these so-called alkaline bath, which of course also detoxify at the same time. What do you think can be detoxified via the skin? It's also a very large organ, the skin. And if you dry brush yourself, the pH value is 8.5, the blood has 7.4, how it is extracted from the connective tissue. And the water temperature, I can slowly let it rise with the bath, which I do for 90 minutes. And then I'm like reborn the next day.
I measured it once. I'm at 42, 43 degrees temperature in the bathtub. And I measured how high my body was. That was 38.5, approximately.
That's what I mean. If I don't do full body hypothermia, then I do ascending baths. But I'm slowly trying to get the operating temperature back to my optimum. But I don't want to underestimate what that means in terms of detoxification capacity. Because there is no more that is not burdened. But whether burdening with my body doing something or not, depends on how much my body can still cope with it. Or what is slowly beginning to destabilize.
May I summarize? If people measure their temperature and see that they are actually above for measurements, also significantly below this 36.8, then the first measure would be to bring more movement into life. Good. Then detoxification. And then really maybe also an infrared sauna. Or even do a hypothermia, which really detoxifies and gives the body the ability to regulate. To produce fever now. And we would probably all be much healthier, even in these phases where we are now again if the body simply had a lot more defense forces. It would not be so susceptible to catching something quickly, to get a virus and to lie flat.
Exactly. Because being confronted with a virus means not getting sick for a long time. Our body has a lot of possibilities to start this process and immediately to clarify it for its own safety. But can it do that enough today? And the question is actually unfounded to live in a worry and fear. I think everyone will feel addressed where he can start. And of course there is a little piece too.
Thank you very much, dear Petra. And you, dear viewers, I just want to give you the following on the way. If you want to watch this show again, go to www.QS24.tv. If you want to see the contact data of our guest or contact him directly, you will also find these data on our homepage on QS24.tv. but you can also Google another guest on the homepage or enter some disease symptom or a health problem in the search term, and you will immediately be led to corresponding videos that have already looked at this topic holistically. So you have many possibilities on the homepage. Just take a look. I thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you all the best. Until next time, and take care of each other.